So I read another book, or another short story from this collection of short stories by Voltaire. This one's called Micromégas, which literally means small big. So it's about a guy named Micromégas. His name's literally Small Bigman, basically. But it's interesting because it's a sci-fi from the 18th century, like the early 18th century, or at least the first half. So like when we think sci-fi, we think of like space age 20th century, or even some of the older sci-fi from the industrialized 19th century. But this is pre-industrialization. It's sci-fi from the world of scientific revolution, I guess. So yeah, it's really interesting, just as an early example of science fiction. So yeah, it's about this guy from a planet around the star Sirius, and because this planet is so many millions of times bigger than the Earth, this person from that planet is proportionally bigger than Earthlings. So Micromégas is almost 40 kilometers tall. He's also much longer lived. Basically everything's scaled up. He has, like, we have 6 or 5 senses. Micromégas has like 1,000 senses or something crazy like that. He lives for, like, his lifespan of people in Sirius are like over 1 million years. And yeah, he's like almost 40 kilometers tall. So he is banished from his planet for writing a book on insects, which is considered a heresy. So I think that's kind of Voltaire mocking how things are similar on Earth, where so I think he says it's a college of Syrian Jesuits that expels him. So like even the Syrians have Jesuits for some reason, and because what he learned about insects on his planet doesn't align with their beliefs, they kicked him out. So anyway, so Micromégas takes this opportunity to travel. And he does so by using the laws of repulsion and attraction, which is to say gravity, which I guess wouldn't be a new, relatively new term. Like Isaac Newton was 17th century, so this is maybe like 100 years after Isaac Newton. So I guess these are still kind of relatively new ideas. I'm trying to think what 100 years ago. Maybe like Einstein's theory of relativity today seems new-ish, although the pace of everything today is so at a proportion that I don't think that's a valid comparison. But anyways, so this guy uses Newton's laws of gravity to travel, and because he understands in gravity, he can anyways travel the stars. Not on a spaceship, just like on his own. So he takes the opportunity to try. He visits many different people. People of varying sizes and lifespans that are proportionate to their sizes. So he makes people gargantuan compared to him that live for exponentially longer than him. And everyone that he meets sort of complains that their life is too short and that they never have enough time. And they all sort of have the same complaints no matter what their situation is. So Micromégas, he stops at Saturn, which is interesting. I guess Saturn wasn't understood to be a gas giant at this point, just a giant. And he meets the secretary of the Academy of Saturn, a man that he calls a dwarf because this Saturnian is only 2 kilometers tall, about a 20th of the size of Micromégas, and equally about a 20th of the lifespan, or much less than that. I think the lifespan of a Saturnian is about 15,000 years, they say, or something like that. So he's like, oh, woe is me, I'm so short-lived, compared to this mighty Syrian, someone from the planet, the star Sirius, not someone from Syria, spelled differently. So they decide to journey together. There's an instance where the secretary, his wife, runs up and's like, oh no, don't go, oh, I'm gonna miss you, oh, you can't leave me, and he's like, no, I'm gonna go travel. So she then goes, oh, that's too bad, then immediately runs off with someone else. Voltaire commenting on women, maybe, or I don't know. So anyway, so they're traveling the solar system, and they get to Earth, and they're like, man, it's really small, should we bother? And he's like, well, we shouldn't leave anything behind, let's just take a look. So they stop at Earth, It takes them like 36 hours to circumnavigate it just by walking across it because it's so small and it's insignificant to them. It says they stop and have a brunch on some mountains, which I like. They eat mountains for breakfast, sort of thing, is what I understand. And then they conclude there's no life on it. They're like, oh no, there's nothing here. But then they find a whale. And they're like, wait, there is life here. But they're like, pick up this whale because they're so big, and they try to communicate with it, but they can't communicate with it. So they're like, I don't know. But then Micromégas, he has this necklace of diamonds that are like 100 kilometers, or not 100 meters in diameter, whatever. His necklace breaks. He picks up one of the diamonds, uses it as a magnifying glass or a microscope, and they find a boat of philosophers. And so he scoops up this boat, and eventually he's able to find ways to communicate with them and to hear what they're saying and to project his voice, project their voice to him, and then quiet his voice down to them. And he quickly learns French because they're speaking French, and then he can communicate with these philosophers. And they're shocked, both the dwarf from Saturn and the Syrian. They're shocked that these humans that are so tiny and minuscule compared to them, that they still have intellect and reasoning and understanding, these capabilities that they assumed these tiny, very short-lived creatures would not have. And so they start communicating. The humans share about the absurdity of war. So they talk about how humans are killing each other by the thousands over a lump of land that none of them will ever see, for someone that none of them will ever meet. And Micromégas is really upset by this, and he's like, well, I'll put a stop to the war by killing them all. And philosophers are like, don't bother, they're doing it themselves anyways. So that was sort of an interesting commentary on the futility of war and just the absurdity of the whole thing. So then the travelers, the Micromégas and the Saturnian, they get the philosophers to share their understanding of the universe and life and the soul and meaning and whatnot. So he's like, so there are numerous different philosophers from numerous different schools of philosophy. So first there's an Aristotelian who starts going off about entelechis and stuff, and then starts sharing something in Greek. And they're like, why are you talking in Greek? And he's like, well, because I don't understand it. And if I don't understand it, I'm going to share it in a language that I don't understand. Which is like, okay, sure. So there's an Aristotelian that shares something that no one really understands. Then there's a Cartesian who talks about, like Descartes, how learning is uncovering pre-existing knowledge and relearning. How in the womb we have complete and utter knowledge, and then being born we lose all of that knowledge and then have to regain it through our life's experience. And Micromégas is kind of like, well, that's that's kind of weird. Why would we lose the knowledge and then have to regain it if we already had it, sort of thing. Then there's a Malebranchist who I don't really understand what the philosophy of Malebranche is, if I'm even pronouncing that correctly. But he's saying like that God is all, both thought and matter. There's no distinction. All of it is created by and exists by God. Then there's a Leibnizian, who of course has this thing about pre-established harmony and all works for the best. And he uses the metaphor of the soul is the hands of a clock pointing towards time, and it chimes, and the body chimes, or the other way around. And I don't know, it's a very confusing metaphor for me. And then there's a Lockean who, Locke, he's all about empiricism. So he's basically says that only what's external to the senses can be true. Only what we can see and measure and observe can be objective truth. And this is the one that I think the travelers really like it. They're like, well, this is great. They embrace this guy. Let me see if I can find that. Yeah, he says, the Lockean says, I affirm nothing, and I'm content to believe that more things are possible than people think. I revere the eternal power, and it is not for me to set limits on it. Okay, so yeah, and then that's the animal from the planet Sirius really liked. They liked that the sort of humility of the humans in that regard. That saying that there's so much more to understand, and I can't really fully understand all of it. And then there's a disciple of Thomas Aquinas comes up and talks about his Summa, that basically that God made all the universe for men, for humans basically, and like if these two travelers who have traveled parts of the universe find that absolutely absurd that the universe was created for a handful of tiny short-lived things on this little tiny planet, so they start laughing at that point. And then at the very end, Micromégas says, look, I'll write you guys a book. It'll explain everything you need to know about philosophy. So he writes this book for them, he gives them the book, and the final page, or the final paragraph of this very, very short story is them taking the book to the Academy of Science or somewhere like that in Paris, and they open the book and all the pages are blank. And then that's how it ends. So yeah, it's a very short story. It does have Voltaire's wit and wisdom. His humor is there, not as much as in Candide, but maybe that's just because it's a shorter book, novel, short story. Yeah, it was really interesting to see. I mean, the whole thing is about like the end of Candide, where they ask the philosopher, "What is the meaning of life?" And he's like, "That's like a bunch of mice asking that. Mice on the ship of a king of Egypt asking why the ship is the way or something. Like basically, you're so insignificant. Why are you asking these things?" And in this story, it's putting everything in perspective, that the Earth is so tiny and so insignificant that to other outer beings, extraterrestrials, we might seem so insignificant as to not even be worthy of investigating. And so yeah, so the whole thing's about perspective and about our insignificance, and if what we do and our existence is insignificant, why bother worrying about it? And so kind of, maybe I'm taking an existential route to that is not intended, but anyways, that's Micromégas by Voltaire.